Admiral Hyun-ki stood on the bridge of the UES Defender, watching the stars stream past through the main screen. His small fleet of 3 ships had been traveling for 6 weeks, carrying supplies to New Sol Colony on planet Hanbit. It was supposed to be a simple mission: deliver food, medicine, and equipment to one of humanity's most successful outer colonies, then return to Earth. The journey from Earth to Hanbit usually took 7 weeks. They were almost there now. Hyun-ki expected to receive the usual greeting messages from the colony's space traffic control any day now. The colonists were always happy to see supply ships arrive. "Admiral," called out Communications Officer Park from his station, "we should be getting signals from Hanbit traffic control by now." "I'm not picking up anything," Hyun-ki frowned. That was strange. New Sol Colony had over 12 million people living there. Their communication systems never went quiet. Even if the main transmitters had problems, there should be backup signals from ships, stations, and emergency beacons. "Keep trying," Hyun-ki ordered. Maybe they're having technical problems. 3 more days passed. Still no signals from Hanbit. The silence worried everyone on the ship. Captain Yoonji from the escort ship Morning Star sent a message asking if they should change course. Hyun-ki told her to keep going. Something was very wrong, and they needed to find out what. When they finally reached the Hanbit system, what they saw made everyone stop breathing. The planet was still there, blue and green like always. But there were no ships moving around it. No space stations. No orbital factories. "Nothing, sir," the sensor operator whispered. "I'm reading debris fields where the station should be. Large ones." Hyun-ki felt ice form in his stomach. "Put it on screen." The main display showed what remained of humanity's proud orbital installations around Hanbit. Twisted metal and shattered structures floated in space like broken toys. The massive space docks that could repair the largest ships were gone. The orbital cities where 500,000 people had lived were nothing but scrap metal. "Take us closer to the planet," Hyun-ki commanded. His voice stayed steady, but his hands shook. As they approached Hanbit, the full horror became clear. The planet's surface was covered with huge craters where cities used to be. The capital city of New Sol, home to 3 million people, was now a circle of melted glass 10 kilometers wide. Every major city showed the same destruction. Whatever weapons had done this had turned stone and metal into smooth black glass. Captain Yoonji arrived on the Defender with her investigation team. She was a small woman with short black hair and eyes that missed nothing. She had served in the Colonial Defense Force for 15 years and had seen combat before. But nothing had prepared her for this. "We need to go down there," she told Hyun-ki. "We need to find out what happened." The landing party took a shuttle to the ruins of New Sol. They wore full environmental suits because their sensors detected strange radiation in the atmosphere. As they walked through what had been the colony's biggest city, they found more evidence of the attack. The destruction was not random. Someone had targeted specific buildings first: the government center, the military base, the communications hub, the spaceport. After destroying these, they had systematically eliminated every other structure. Nothing was left standing. Tech specialist Minho was checking his instruments when he stopped suddenly. "Captain, I'm getting readings from underground." "About 200 meters that way." They followed Minho's directions to a pile of rubble that had once been the Colonial Administration building. Using portable diggers, they cleared away debris until they found a reinforced bunker. Inside, emergency power still ran computer systems designed to survive almost anything. Minho worked quickly to access the data systems. Most of the information was corrupted, but he managed to recover the final transmission logs. What he found made everyone gather around his portable screen. The last message was from Governor Lee, recorded just hours before the colony died. His face was calm, but his eyes showed terrible fear. "This is Governor Lee of New Sol Colony, final transmission. Unknown ships appeared in our system 18 hours ago. They ignored all attempts at communication. They began attacking our orbital defenses without warning." The recording flickered as explosions shook the building where Lee was hiding. "The aliens? They call themselves the Vakari Dominion. They sent one message before the attack began. They said humanity is a contamination that must be cleansed from the galaxy. They said we have no right to exist among the stars." Another explosion, closer this time. Lee looked directly into the camera. "Tell Earth, tell them what happened here. Tell them the Vakari are coming for all human worlds. Tell them." The recording ended in static. Captain Onji felt sick. 12 million people, men, women, children, all dead because some alien race had decided humans should not exist. She had never heard of the Vakari before. No one had. They had appeared from nowhere and committed genocide. The investigation team spent 3 more days on Hanbit, gathering evidence. They found strange crystalline residue near many blast sites. The crystals seemed to eat organic matter, breaking it down into basic elements. They also found energy weapon signatures unlike anything in human databases. The technology was far advanced, but not impossibly so. Most disturbing was how methodical the attack had been. The aliens had not acted in anger or fear. They had planned this carefully. They had studied human settlements and designed their assault to leave no survivors. This was not war. This was extermination. When they returned to the ship, Hyun-Ki called his senior officers together. "We leave for Earth immediately. Maximum speed." "Sir," asked Captain Yoon-ji, "should we send a message ahead?" Hyun-Ki shook his head. "Not over subspace. If these Vakari are monitoring our communications, we don't want them to know we've discovered what happened here. We deliver this news in person." The journey back to Earth seemed endless. Every day, Hyun-Ki wondered if they would arrive to find Earth's solar system as empty and dead as Hanbit. Every night he looked at the evidence they had gathered and tried to understand how any race could choose genocide as their first response to meeting humanity. The Vakari had made their message very clear. They saw humans as a disease to be cured. They would not negotiate. They would not coexist. They wanted every human dead and every human world empty, but they had made one mistake. They had left witnesses. Admiral Hyun-Ki and his crew carried the proof of Vakari crimes back to Earth. Soon, humanity would know what had happened to New Sol Colony. Soon, humanity would have to decide how to respond to a race that wanted them extinct. The Defender and her escorts raced through space toward Earth, carrying news that would change everything. Behind them, Hanbit turned silently in space, a dead world that had once been home to 12 million human souls. Ahead of them lay Earth, still unaware that humanity now faced its greatest enemy. War was coming. The Vakari had made sure of that. President Jin-ae stood at the window of her office looking out at the lights of Geneva below. It was 3 in the morning, but she had not slept. Admiral Hyun-Ki's report lay on her desk, along with video evidence from Hanbit that would give her nightmares for the rest of her life. 12 million people. Gone. Not killed in battle. Not lost to disease or accident. Murdered by aliens who had decided humanity should not exist. The images from New Sol Colony showed cities turned to glass, orbital stations torn apart, and not a single human survivor found anywhere. "Madam President," her aide spoke softly from the doorway, "the emergency council session is ready." Ginny nodded and picked up the data pad containing Admiral Hyun-Ki's full report. She had read it 5 times already, hoping to find some detail she had missed, some sign that this was not as bad as it seemed. But the facts were clear. Humanity had encountered its first truly hostile alien race, and that race wanted every human dead. The United Earth Council chamber was full despite the early hour. Representatives from all 47 human colonies had gathered, either in person or by quantum communication link. Admiral Hyun-Ki stood at the center podium, still wearing his dress uniform from the previous day's briefing. "Ladies and gentlemen," President Jin-ae began, "Admiral Hyun-Ki will present his findings from New Sol Colony. I warn you that what you are about to see is disturbing." The lights dimmed and the wall screens showed the first images from Hanbit. Gasps and horrified whispers filled the chamber as the representatives saw the orbital debris fields, the crater where New Sol had been, the systematic destruction of every human settlement. Admiral Hyun-Ki's voice was steady as he explained what his team had found. The attack was not random. The aliens targeted our military and communication facilities first, then proceeded to eliminate every sign of human presence. They used energy weapons far beyond our current technology. The recording of Governor Lee's final message played next. The chamber fell completely silent as they watched a man face his own death with dignity, knowing that 12 million people were about to die with him. When Lee spoke the word Vakari, several representatives made notes on their data pads. "The aliens call themselves the Vakari Dominion," Hyun-Ki continued. "According to Governor Lee's final transmission, they consider humanity a contamination that must be cleansed from the galaxy. They did not attempt negotiation. They did not demand surrender. They simply began killing, Representative Kim from the Tau Ceti colony raised her hand. Admiral, do we know anything else about these Vakari? Their numbers, their technology, their location? We are working on that, Hyun-ki replied. What we do know is troubling. Their weapons technology is advanced but not impossibly so. They appear to use directed energy systems we don't fully understand, but our scientists believe we can develop countermeasures. Admiral Tae-hyun, head of Naval Intelligence, stepped forward. Madam President, if I may add to Admiral Hyun-ki's report. Jin-ae nodded, though she suspected she would not like what Tae-hyun had to say. The intelligence chief was known for his careful analysis and conservative estimates. If he was worried, the situation was worse than anyone thought. We have been reviewing deep space monitoring data from the past 6 months, Tae-hyun began. We found energy signatures matching those from Hanbit near 3 other colony systems. At the time, we attributed communication losses with these colonies to solar interference and equipment failures. The chamber erupted in worried conversations. Representative Park from New Tokyo Colony stood up quickly. Are you saying other colonies have been attacked? We don't know, Tae-hyun admitted. We have sent ships to investigate, but they won't arrive for several weeks. What I can tell you is that the energy signatures appeared months before the attack on Hanbit. The Vakari may have been studying our defenses and testing our response times. President Jin-ae felt the weight of leadership pressing down on her shoulders. If Tae-hyun was right, the attack on New Seoul Colony was not an isolated incident. It was the beginning of a campaign to wipe out humanity one colony at a time. Madam President, the Chamber's communication officer called out. We're receiving a priority signal from the outer system monitors. Unknown ship approaching Earth. Every person in the chamber froze. Ginny's mind raced through the possibilities. Was this a human ship bringing more bad news, or had the Vakari come to Earth? Put it on screen, she ordered. The main display showed a ship unlike anything in human databases. It was massive, easily 5 times larger than humanity's biggest battleship. Its hull was dark and angular, covered with strange crystalline structures that seemed to pulse with internal light. As they watched, the alien vessel took position beyond Pluto's orbit and stopped. They're broadcasting on all frequencies, the communication officer reported. Audio and video signal. Let's hear it, Jin-ae said, though she dreaded what message this ship might carry. The screen filled with an image that would haunt humanity's nightmares. The Vakari representative was tall and thin, with gray skin stretched tight over sharp bones. Its eyes were large and completely black, showing no emotion. When it spoke, its voice was like breaking glass. Humans of Earth, the alien began. I am voice of the Dominion Kethtar. You have seen what happened to your colony on the world you call Hanbit. This was not random violence. This was justice. Several representatives started shouting questions and demands, but Jin-ae held up her hand for silence. She needed to hear this. The Vakari Dominion has observed your species for many cycles, Kethtar continued. You spread across worlds like a disease, consuming resources and fouling clean systems with your presence. This cannot be allowed to continue. The alien's image leaned forward as if looking directly at each person in the chamber. You will abandon all worlds beyond this system within 30 of your days. You will restrict yourselves to your birth world and never again venture into clean space. If you comply, your species will be allowed to exist in isolation. If you do not comply, you will join your colony in death. The transmission ended abruptly. The alien ship remained in the outer system for exactly 1 hour, then disappeared into faster-than-light travel. It left behind a humanity that finally understood the full scope of the threat they faced. President Jin-ae looked around the chamber, at faces filled with shock, anger, and fear. She knew that the next few hours would determine whether humanity had a future among the stars, or would die fighting for the right to exist. We have 30 days to decide, she said quietly. But I think we all know there is really no choice to make. Representative Yuna from Europa Station stood up. Madam President, surely we should attempt negotiation. There must be some way to reach an understanding with these aliens. Did you see the same transmission I did? Demanded Representative Wu Jin from the Mars colony. They're not interested in negotiation. They want us gone or dead. Those are our only options. Admiral Hyun-ki cleared his throat. Madam President, with your permission, I'd like to present our preliminary military assessment. Jin-ae nodded, knowing that the next few minutes would shape humanity's response to the greatest crisis in their history. Based on our analysis of the Hanbit attack, Hyun-Ki began, the Vakari are technologically advanced but not invincible. Their weapons are powerful, but they seem to rely on overwhelming firepower rather than tactical innovation. Our ships are smaller and more maneuverable. With sufficient numbers and proper tactics, we can fight them. What kind of numbers? Asked Representative Kim. Hundreds of thousands of ships, Hyun-Ki replied without hesitation. Maybe more. We would need to mobilize every shipyard, every factory, every resource we have. It would be the largest military buildup in human history. The chamber fell silent as the representatives absorbed this information. Building such a fleet would require sacrifices from every colony, every settlement, every human in space. President Jin-ae stood up slowly. The chair recognizes Representative Dalsu from the Centauri system for a motion. Dalsu rose to his feet, his voice carrying across the chamber. Madam President, I move that the United Earth Council authorize full military mobilization in response to the Vakari threat. We have 30 days to show them that humanity will not go quietly into extinction. Seconded, called out Representative So-Jin from the Belt Mining Consortium. The vote was unanimous. 47 human worlds had just committed themselves to the largest war effort in their species' history. They would build a fleet large enough to make the Vakari regret ever threatening humanity. As the representatives began discussing logistics and resource allocation, President Jin-ae looked up at the chamber's ceiling, beyond which lay the stars where humanity had built homes among alien suns. In 30 days, they would give the Vakari their answer, and that answer would be delivered by 500,000 warships. Chief Engineer Hae-won had not slept properly in 3 weeks. She stood in the control center of Luna Shipyard 7, watching displays that showed construction progress across the solar system. Red lights blinked where resource shortages slowed production. Green lights marked completed vessels ready for deployment. There were never enough green lights. Status report, she called, out to her team of coordinators. Scattered across the facility, Yard 12 just finished another batch of destroyers, reported Engineer Sung-ho from his station. 20 ships ready for testing, but we're running low on quantum processors again. Hae-won rubbed her tired eyes. The quantum processors were essential for ship navigation and weapon systems, but they took time to manufacture. Every delay meant fewer ships ready when the Vakari returned, and they would return. Everyone knew that. Reroute processor shipments from civilian projects, she ordered. Everything goes to military production now. It had been this way since President Jin-ae announced the mobilization. Every asteroid mining operation, every orbital factory, every manufacturing facility in human space had been converted to support the war effort. Civilian ships were stripped for parts. Luxury goods production stopped completely. Humanity was betting everything on building the largest fleet in their history. The transformation had been incredible to watch. Within days of the council vote, cargo ships began arriving at shipyards carrying raw materials from across 47 star systems. Entire asteroid belts were being mined faster than ever before. Space stations that had built merchant vessels for decades were retooled to construct warships. Hae-won's communication screen chimed with an incoming call from Chief Designer Dong-hyun. His face appeared, showing the exhaustion they all felt. Behind him, she could see his design team working at holographic displays, creating the next generation of human warships. Hae-won, we've finished testing the new destroyer class, Dong-hyun reported. The quantum disruption weapons work better than projected. They can punch through Vakari shield technology. This was good news. The design teams had worked around the clock to analyze the energy signatures from Hanbit, trying to understand Vakari technology well enough to build effective weapons. It seemed they had succeeded. What about the armor systems? Hae-won asked. Even better, the molecular bonding process creates hull materials 50% stronger than our previous designs, and the self-repair systems can fix minor damage automatically during combat. Dong-hyun's team had revolutionized human ship design in just 4 months. They had taken lessons learned from the Hanbit attack and created vessels specifically designed to fight the Vakari. Each new ship was faster, tougher, and more deadly than anything humanity had built before. How many designs are ready for mass production? Hae-won asked. 5 classes. Fast destroyers for hit-and-run attacks, heavy cruisers for direct combat, battleships for breaking through enemy lines, carriers for fighter support, and dreadnoughts for making sure the Vakari remember this war. The dreadnoughts were Dong Hyun's masterpiece. Each one was 3 kilometers long and carried enough firepower to destroy small moons. They were slow and expensive, but they could absorb tremendous damage while dealing out even more. Humanity had never built anything like them before. Across the solar system, Admiral Kyung-ho was solving a different problem. Building ships was only half the challenge. They also needed crews to operate them, hundreds of thousands of crews. He stood in the main briefing room of Training Station Alpha, watching new recruits file in for orientation. They came from every human world and every walk of life. Former merchant captains sat next to fresh academy graduates. Asteroid miners learned navigation alongside former luxury liner pilots. "Listen up," Kyung-ho announced as the room filled. 6 months ago, most of you were living normal lives. Today you're here because humanity needs warriors. The Vakari want us extinct. We're going to teach them why that was a mistake. The training program was unlike anything attempted before. Using advanced neural interfaces, recruits could experience months of simulated combat in just weeks. They learned ship operations, fleet tactics, and weapon systems at accelerated rates. Veterans from the colonial defense forces worked alongside the neural training systems, sharing real combat experience. But the technology could only do so much. The rest depended on human determination and the will to fight for survival. Lieutenant Commander Mi Young was one of the veterans helping train new officers. She had served on patrol ships in the outer colonies for 8 years before the Vakari threat emerged. Now she found herself teaching academy graduates how to command destroyers in fleet combat. "Remember," she told her current class, "the Vakari rely on overwhelming firepower and rigid formations. They expect their enemies to fight the same way. We're going to disappoint them." She activated a holographic display showing fleet movement patterns. "Human ships are smaller and more maneuverable than Vakari vessels. We use that advantage. Hit them from unexpected angles. Strike fast and move before they can respond. Make them fight our kind of war, not theirs." The students took notes eagerly, knowing their lives might depend on these lessons. Mi Young had seen the intelligence reports from captured Vakari technology. The aliens were powerful, but they were not invincible. They could be beaten, but only if humanity fought smarter, not just harder. Meanwhile, in the outer reaches of the solar system, Captain Sang-min piloted his stealth ship Shadow through the darkness between stars. His mission was simple but vital: gather intelligence on Vakari movements without being detected. The Shadow was one of humanity's most advanced vessels, designed for reconnaissance and espionage. Its hull absorbed sensor beams and energy signatures, making it nearly invisible to detection systems. Sang-min had been using it to track Vakari fleet movements for 3 months. What he had discovered was both encouraging and terrifying. The aliens were gathering forces near human space, but they seemed confident that humanity would either surrender or fall quickly. Intelligence reports suggested they were assembling a fleet of just over 200,000 ships. They had no idea what was waiting for them. Log entry: Day 92. Sang-min spoke into his recorder as he watched distant alien vessels through passive sensors. Vakari continue standard patrol patterns, no indication they suspect human military buildup. Fleet size appears stable at approximately 210,000 vessels of various classes. He paused, watching a group of Vakari battleships maneuver in formation. They moved with mechanical precision, each ship maintaining exact distance and heading. It was impressive but predictable. Human fleets would never be so rigid. Personal note, he continued, the enemy shows no signs of understanding human psychology. They believe their ultimatum will be sufficient to force compliance. They're about to learn that humans don't surrender when faced with extinction. We fight back. Back on Earth, the construction statistics told an incredible story. In 18 months, humanity had built more warships than in the previous century combined. Orbital yards that had taken years to construct single vessels now completed new ships every few days. The industrial mobilization was the greatest achievement in human history. Fleet Admiral So-jin reviewed the numbers from her command center on Luna. 500,000 ships of all classes. Destroyers, cruisers, battleships, carriers, and dreadnoughts. Each one crewed by humans who had trained for this moment. Each one armed with weapons designed specifically to kill Vakari. The fleet was scattered across multiple staging areas throughout the solar system. No single attack could destroy them all. When the time came, they would converge on the Vakari with overwhelming force and fury. "Admiral," her aide reported, "President Jin A is requesting a final briefing before fleet deployment." Sojin nodded. The moment of truth was approaching. Soon humanity would send its answer to the Vakari ultimatum. That answer would be written in quantum fire and delivered by 500,000 warships. She looked out at the orbital yards where the last ships were receiving final checks and crew assignments. Engineers, designers, builders, and trainers had given everything to make this moment possible. Millions of humans had worked around the clock for 18 months, driven by the knowledge that failure meant extinction. The Vakari had wanted to eliminate humanity from the galaxy. Instead, they had awakened something they did not understand. They had faced humans who would rather die fighting than live as prisoners on their own world. In just a few more days, the largest fleet in human history would deliver humanity's response to the threat of genocide. The Vakari would learn what happened when they threatened a species that refused to surrender. War was coming, and humanity was ready. War Prime Tethkar stood in the command center of his flagship, watching sensor displays that showed the edge of human space. His fleet of 220,000 vessels moved in perfect formation toward the system humans called Earth. The campaign would be simple. Eliminate their military forces, destroy their shipyards, and complete the cleansing that had begun at their outer colonies. The humans had ignored the Dominion's generous offer to retreat to their birth world. Now they would face the consequences of their defiance. Tethkar expected the war to last perhaps 10 cycles. No species had ever resisted the Vakari for longer than that. War Prime, his sensor operator reported, detecting multiple energy signatures ahead. Human fleet appears to be gathering. Tethkar studied the readings with mild interest. The humans seemed to have assembled their pathetic defense forces to make a final stand. It was admirable in a primitive way, but ultimately pointless. No species could match Vakari military might. Display tactical overview, he commanded. The holographic display showed both fleets approaching each other in the void between star systems. The Vakari formation was precise and orderly, as befitted a superior civilization. The human formation was impossible. Sensor operator, Tethkar said slowly. Verify ship count. Confirmed, War Prime. Human fleet consists of approximately 500,000 vessels. Tethkar stared at the display in disbelief. 500,000 ships. The humans had somehow built and crewed a fleet more than twice the size of his own. In less than 2 of their years, they had accomplished what should have been impossible. All commanders to combat stations, he ordered, his voice betraying none of his sudden uncertainty. Prepare for engagement. Admiral Junseo commanded the human vanguard from the bridge of the battleship Indomitable. Around him, tactical displays showed the massive Vakari fleet approaching in their traditional wall formation. It was exactly what human intelligence had predicted. The aliens fought the same way they had for centuries, relying on overwhelming firepower and rigid discipline. All ships, this is Admiral Junseo, he broadcast to his 30,000-vessel vanguard force. Today we avenge New Sol Colony. Today we show the galaxy that humanity will not go quietly into extinction. All ships, attack pattern Alpha 7. Let's teach these aliens what humans do to genocidal monsters. The human vanguard accelerated toward the Vakari formation, but not in the direct assault the aliens expected. Instead, the ships split into multiple groups approaching from different angles and speeds. Fast destroyers raced ahead while heavy battleships held back, creating confusion in the alien formation. The first exchange of fire lit up the darkness between stars. Vakari energy beams lashed out with tremendous power, designed to overwhelm enemy shields through brute force. But the human ships were not where the aliens expected them to be. Captain Mi Young's destroyer squadron hit the Vakari left flank, while their guns were still turning to track the main human force. Her ships fired their new quantum disruption weapons at point-blank range, watching Vakari shields collapse under the unexpected assault. Direct hits, her weapons officer reported. Their shields are down. All ships follow up strikes, Mi Young ordered. Don't give them time to recover. The human weapons had been designed specifically to counter Vakari technology. Where alien shields could absorb massive energy bombardments, they proved vulnerable to quantum disruption fields that attacked the shield generators themselves. Vakari ships that had seemed invincible suddenly found themselves defenseless, but the aliens were not helpless. Their ships were larger and more heavily armed than anything humanity had built before the war. When Vakari weapons found their targets, human ships died in bursts of plasma fire. The battle spread across thousands of cubic kilometers of space as both fleets maneuvered for advantage. HFY War Prime Tethkar watched his orderly formation dissolve into dozens of smaller engagements. This was not how civilized species fought. The humans attacked from every direction, used unpredictable tactics, and seemed to care nothing for proper military procedure. "Order the reserve squadrons to advance," he commanded. "Restore formation discipline." But his subordinates were discovering that human tactics made formation discipline nearly impossible. Every time HFY ships tried to organize into proper attack patterns, human vessels would appear from unexpected directions and force them to scatter or die. The tide of battle began to turn when Admiral Young-Soo led his heavy assault group against the HFY center. His flagship, the dreadnought Retribution, was 3 kilometers of human engineering dedicated to destroying enemies of humanity. Its quantum disruption cannons could punch through any known armor, and its fighter bays carried enough small craft to overwhelm entire squadrons. "Target the HFY command ship," Young-Soo ordered. "If we can break their leadership, their formations will collapse completely." The Retribution and her escort ships drove straight toward Tethkar's flagship, absorbing terrible damage but never slowing down. Human engineers had designed the dreadnoughts to survive anything the enemy could throw at them while delivering devastating attacks in return. HFY energy beams hammered the Retribution's shields and armor, burning through outer hull sections and destroying weapon mounts. But the ship's self-repair systems worked frantically to maintain critical functions while damage control teams rerouted power and sealed breaches. "Shields down to 30%, the tactical officer reported as another HFY volley struck home. "All power to forward weapons," Young-Soo commanded. "We only need one good shot." The Retribution's main guns charged to full power and fired at the HFY flagship from less than 1,000 kilometers away. The quantum disruption beam struck Tethkar's ship amidships, tearing through shields and armor like they were made of paper. Secondary explosions rippled along the alien vessel's hull as critical systems failed. Tethkar felt his ship shudder under the devastating impact. Warning lights flashed throughout the command center as damage reports flooded in from all sections. The humans had somehow built weapons that could cripple even the most powerful HFY vessels with single shots. "War Prime," his tactical officer reported with barely controlled panic. "Primary weapons offline. Shield generators destroyed. Engine power failing." Through his view screen, Tethkar watched human ships swarming around his crippled flagship like predators surrounding wounded prey. Smaller vessels darted in to deliver precise strikes while larger ships held back to prevent any rescue attempts. "Sir," his communications officer called out, "the human commander is requesting our surrender." Tethkar stared at the display in shock. No one had ever demanded HFY surrender before. The Dominion had conquered dozens of species over the centuries, but none had ever turned the tables like this. Admiral Young-Soo's voice came through the communication system, speaking in accented but clear HFY. "War Prime Tethkar, your ship is disabled and your fleet is broken. Surrender now and your crew will be treated according to civilized standards." The offer of mercy was almost as shocking as the demand for surrender. HFY doctrine called for the complete elimination of defeated enemies. The concept of sparing conquered foes was alien to their military thinking. Tethkar looked around his damaged command center at officers who had never known defeat. His fleet was scattered and taking terrible losses. Human ships seemed to be everywhere, striking with coordination and ferocity that the HFY had never encountered. "War Prime," his tactical officer whispered, "we could still detonate the ship's power core. Take some of them with us." Tethkar considered this option for a moment, then slowly shook his head. His crew did not deserve to die for his failures. The Dominion would have to find another way to deal with the human problem. "Signal surrender to the human fleet," he ordered quietly. The Battle of Kepler Station, as historians would later name it, ended with the capture of the HFY War Prime and the destruction or surrender of most of his fleet. Less than 50,000 alien ships escaped to carry news of the defeat back to HFY space. Fleet Admiral Sojin reviewed the battle reports from her command ship as human vessels moved to secure prisoners and salvage useful technology. The victory had been decisive, but it had come at a cost. Nearly 30,000 human ships had been destroyed or disabled, and over 1 million crew members had given their lives. But humanity had proven something important. The HFY were not invincible. They could be beaten by superior tactics, better technology, and the desperate courage of a species fighting for survival. Admiral, her intelligence officer reported, "We've recovered data from the Vakari flagship. It includes star charts showing the location of their home system." So-Jin studied the captured information, already planning the next phase of the war. The Vakari had started this conflict by attempting genocide. Now humanity would finish it by ensuring the aliens could never threaten anyone again. War Prime Tethkar sat in a human detention cell, still trying to understand how everything had gone so wrong. The Dominion had faced the humans expecting a quick victory over a primitive species. Instead, they had encountered an enemy that refused to accept defeat and had the industrial capacity to build impossible fleets. The humans had not just won a battle. Fleet Admiral So-Jin stood on the bridge of her flagship Vengeance, watching the red planet Kethvalar grow larger on the main screen. The Vakari homeworld looked peaceful from space, with its ancient cities and orbital defense platforms gleaming in the light of twin suns. It was hard to believe this world had spawned a race that committed genocide as policy. The journey from human space to the Vakari home system had taken 8 months. 8 months of hunting down fleeing alien fleets, liberating conquered worlds, and gathering intelligence about the species that had tried to exterminate humanity. What they had learned was both enlightening and horrifying. The Vakari Dominion had existed for over 2,000 years, expanding across the galaxy by destroying any species they considered inferior. Dozens of civilizations had been wiped out completely, their worlds cleansed and claimed by the self-proclaimed superior race. Humanity was just the latest target in a campaign of extermination that had lasted millennia. "Admiral," Captain Yoonji reported from her position at the tactical station, "we're receiving surrender broadcasts from the Planetary Defense Force. They're requesting terms." So Jin was not surprised. The Battle of Kethvalar had been brief but decisive. 100,000 human warships against the Vakari's last-ditch defense force of 30,000 vessels. The outcome had never been in doubt. "Any word from the planetary government?" So-Jin asked. "The High Council is requesting an audience. They want to negotiate a ceasefire." So-Jin almost laughed at the irony. The same species that had refused all human attempts at communication now wanted to talk. They had discovered that negotiation became much more attractive when facing total defeat. "Tell them I'll see their representatives in 1 hour," she decided. "And Captain, make sure our security teams are ready. We're not taking any chances." The meeting took place in the Vengeance's main conference room, with the Vakari delegation surrounded by armed human marines. The alien representatives looked nothing like the arrogant War Prime who had delivered humanity's death sentence 2 years ago. These Vakari seemed smaller somehow, diminished by defeat and the knowledge that their species' fate now rested in human hands. High Counselor Vashirai spoke for the delegation, his voice lacking the commanding tone that had characterized previous Vakari communications. "Admiral So-Jin of the Human Forces, we come seeking terms for ending this conflict." "The conflict will end when we say it ends," So-Jin replied coldly. "You started this war by attempting to exterminate my species. You murdered 12 million innocent people and threatened to kill billions more. The only question now is whether your species survives its own genocidal policies." The Vakari delegation exchanged nervous glances. They had clearly expected some form of negotiation, perhaps territorial concessions or tribute payments. The possibility of complete extinction had apparently not occurred to them. "Surely," Vashirai said carefully, "there can be some accommodation between our peoples. The Dominion is prepared to offer significant compensation for the regrettable events at your outer colonies." "Regrettable events?" So-Jin's voice turned ice cold. "You call the systematic murder of 12 million people a regrettable event?" She activated a holographic display showing images from New Sol Colony. The melted cities, the orbital debris, the crystalline residue that had consumed human remains. The Vakari delegation recoiled from the evidence of their own crimes. "This is what your people did," So-Jin continued. "Not in the heat of battle, not by accident, but as a deliberate act of genocide. You targeted civilians, including children. You destroyed hospitals, schools, and homes. You tried to erase every trace that humans had ever lived on that world." Admiral Jae-hyun, who had led the assault on the Vakari orbital defenses, spoke from his position beside So-Jin. "Our intelligence teams have uncovered evidence of similar attacks on 43 other species over the past 2 millennia. Your Dominion has committed genocide dozens of times. This ends now." Vashrai's composure finally cracked. You cannot destroy an entire civilization for the actions of our military. There are billions of innocent Vakari on this world who had no part in these decisions. Sojin studied the alien representative for a long moment. Innocent? Your entire society was built on the belief that other species were inferior and deserved extermination. Your people celebrated the conquest of other worlds. Your children were taught that genocide was justified if it advanced Vakari interests. She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. But you're right about one thing. We're not going to commit genocide, even against a species that practices it as policy. That would make us no better than you. The relief on the Vakari faces was visible, but Sojin was not finished. However, she continued, your species will pay for its crimes. The Vakari military will be completely disbanded. All warships will be destroyed or transferred to human control. Your government will be dissolved and replaced with a tribunal that includes representatives from every species you've wronged, President. Ginny's voice came through the communication system from Earth. She had been monitoring the negotiations and was ready to deliver humanity's final terms. The Vakari. People will spend the next 5 generations making reparations to the survivors of your genocidal campaigns, Ginny announced. Your technology, your resources, your labor will be dedicated to rebuilding what you destroyed. Every Vakari world will be monitored by peacekeeping forces to ensure compliance. And if we refuse? Vashre asked quietly. Admiral Jae-hyun answered bluntly. Then we'll glass every Vakari world and be done with it. You've proven that your species cannot be trusted to coexist with others. Either you accept rehabilitation under our supervision, or you face the same fate you inflicted on 43 other civilizations. The choice was stark and final. Submission or extinction. The Vakari had offered humanity the same ultimatum 2 years ago, and now they faced the consequences of their own policies. Vashre looked around the conference room at the human officers who would decide his species' fate. These were the same humans the Dominion had dismissed as primitive and weak. They had proven to be neither. We accept your terms, he said finally. The formal surrender ceremony took place 3 days later in the ruins of the Vakari High Command Center. President Jinne arrived from Earth to witness the moment when humanity's greatest enemy officially submitted to human authority. Ambassador Dalsu read the terms of surrender while representatives from dozens of liberated species watched via quantum communication. The Vakari would disarm completely, submit to foreign oversight, and dedicate their civilization to making amends for 2 millennia of genocide. It was justice, but it felt hollow to many of the humans present. No amount of reparations would bring back the 12 million dead of New Sol Colony. No punishment could undo the suffering the Vakari had inflicted across the galaxy. 5 years later, Admiral Hyun-ki returned to the Hanbit system aboard a ship carrying the first wave of reconstruction equipment. The planet still bore the scars of Vakari weapons, but life was beginning to return to its dead surface. New Sol Colony was being rebuilt, this time with help from species across the galaxy that had suffered under Vakari rule. The construction crews included humans, liberated aliens, and even reformed Vakari, working to atone for their people's crimes. Hyun-ki stood in the memorial plaza where the colonial capital had once been. 12 million names were carved into black stone walls that rose toward the sky like reaching fingers. At the center of the memorial, a simple inscription captured the lesson humanity had learned. They sought to erase us from the stars. Instead, they taught the galaxy why humanity protects its own. The Vakari had awakened something in humanity that had always been there but rarely shown. When faced with extinction, humans had not chosen surrender or flight. They had chosen to fight back with everything they had, to build impossible fleets and attempt impossible victories. The galaxy was a different place now. Species that had hidden in fear for centuries were emerging to build new alliances. The threat of genocide that had hung over the galaxy for 2 millennia was finally gone. And at the center of this new order stood humanity, reluctant but determined guardians of galactic peace. Hyun-ki placed a memorial wreath at the base of the monument and stepped back to salute the dead. 12 million people had died to teach the galaxy that some lines could never be crossed. Their sacrifice had not been in vain. Above him, construction ships from a dozen species worked to rebuild what the Vakari had destroyed. The colony would rise again, stronger than before and protected by the knowledge that humanity would never again allow genocide to go unanswered. The war was over. The peace had been won. And among the stars that had once seemed cold and hostile, humanity had found its place as the species that said no to extinction and meant it. The Vakari had tried to cleanse the galaxy of human contamination. Instead, they had contaminated the galaxy with the idea that some species would fight for the right of all species to exist. It was a lesson that would echo through the cosmos for generations to come. War Prime Tethkar, now serving as a manual laborer on a reconstruction project, paused in his work to look up at the human ships in orbit. He had started this war expecting quick victory over a primitive species.